This is episode 63 with marathoners, coaches, and the duo behind Marathon Training Academy, Angie and Trevor Spencer. This episode is for all the marathoners out there, especially those of you thinking of running your first marathon. This is your host, Jason Fitzgerald, and today I'm speaking with Angie and Trevor Spencer. You might have heard of them. They have one of the most popular running podcasts in all of iTunes called Marathon Training Academy, and their website and blog has the same name. They help runners of all abilities run marathons faster, for the first time, or without injuries. They do it all. And today, we're going to be going over all of the mistakes to avoid and the strategies and tactics that will ensure you have a successful and enjoyable marathon. But before we dive in, I want to thank one of our listeners named Maxine for leaving a really thoughtful review on Apple Podcasts. She wrote, "Super professional podcast with high production values, well-researched interviews, and lately an impressive lineup of guests. Jason's no-nonsense approach to running and fitness is a welcome addition to my subscription list. I'd like to hear him co-host more episodes. I enjoy listening to runners shooting the breeze." Maxine, first, I greatly appreciate the kind words. That really made my day, and I'm grateful you took the time to review the Strength Running Podcast. And second, thank you for the recommendation. I love hearing what you all like listening to so that I can do more of those types of episodes. So in this case, I'll definitely have another host on with me to take a bunch of questions and shoot the breeze. If you'd like to review the podcast and make a suggestion, I would greatly appreciate that and your efforts. Just go on to Apple Podcasts and leave an honest review. All right, everyone, without further ado, please welcome Angie and Trevor to the show. Trevor and Angie, thanks for being on the podcast today.
Thanks, Jason. It's great to be here.
Great to be here. Thanks, Jason.
So I'm really excited about this conversation because I think one of the things that we have in common is that we both work with and interact with a lot of runners on a daily basis. So we have this really interesting front row seat to how runners think and behave about running. And, you know, it's probably one of the most interesting parts of my job. And so today we are going to talk about the marathon and more specifically how to tackle it as a relative beginner. And so I think it's going to be interesting with your background. And you have some experience with running a marathon as a complete beginner, don't you, Trevor?
Oh, definitely. I feel like I still do that, even though I've run 14 marathons now. It wasn't that long ago. I was a desk potato. I won't use the word couch potato because I did like to hike and do team sports, but I spent a lot of time sitting. I was in full-time ministry, which required a lot of, I was pastoring a small church and I worked with at-risk teenagers. So I did a lot of counseling. I did a lot of sermon prep, which involved a lot of sitting. And one thing I knew is that I hated running, going way back to when I was a kid, and like just straight refused to run the mandatory mile. The public schools in California made every kid do, I think, a mile in 7th grade. I just straight up refused. So I hated running with a passion. Well, Angie and I, after we got married, her example of just fitness and being a runner eventually rubbed off on me. So I ran my first, I don't even think I started with a 5K. I ran a 12K as my first race. And then Angie challenged me to do a half marathon, which I trained for. I did the Little Rock half marathon. And after I finished that, I finished in 2:02. So around the middle of the pack, my feet felt like they were just pulverized. Like someone had held me upside down and slapped the bottom of my feet with a boat oar. I mean, that's how it felt. And I thought, there's no way I could run a marathon.
I thought I was going to have to carry him to our hotel because he was like limping along, like sitting down every 5 seconds.
And what's even more pathetic is that in that same race, Angie did the full marathon, or you just had a baby.
I'd had a baby 5 months previously. I'd had our third son. So I was postpartum. It was my first marathon coming back from the pregnancy. So, It
all blends together.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, my wife is 6 months postpartum right now. And I can't imagine her running a marathon. So props to you. That is just incredible.
Congrats to you guys.
Yeah.
Well, so we were already doing the podcast by then. And part of the appeal of the show was I was a total novice runner, just getting into it. People could really relate to that. and we were just keeping it real. And I described my first race and all the gory details. Well, people that follow the show were saying, okay, Trev, now when are you going to do a full marathon? So I eventually did decide to take the plunge. I signed up for my first marathon, and it was the hardest physical thing that I've ever done to get through that first marathon. I finished in 4:32, I think. And Angie helped pace me. I think she was like running backwards part of the time, like saying, come on.
Sure, that made you feel good.
It's a real test of a marriage to pace your partner during a marathon. Let's just put it that way. We've never done it again.
Part of the reason why I wanted to do it, Jason, is there was a question in my head, and that was, can I learn to like what I hate currently? Can I retrain my brain? And the answer is yes, you can do that. You can learn to love, in fact, what you can't stand right now. So, I used to hate running, and now it's definitely a big part of my identity. And I can't imagine myself not being a runner.
It's so interesting, right? One of these things that, just like me, I hated running as a kid, and then all of a sudden I was a 3-season runner in high school. And it happened almost immediately. And now I can't imagine my life without running. So it's just incredible to see how much your life can be impacted by one seemingly minor decision to run your first marathon, to go out for the cross country team as a freshman in high school, like I did. So I'm glad that you did it. How was your training like before your first marathon? Was it stellar and perfect or not?
That's a good question. It was hit and miss because I tend to be a lazy runner. So I think I skipped a lot of cross training and strength training. We just had you on our show to talk about strength training and the importance of it. I don't think I did any strength training, even though all of that was called for in the plan that Angie had designed. It's not like she was standing over my shoulder to, enforce that I did it. But, so I was doing the best that I could with the amount of motivation and laziness that I had at the time. So I would say I could have trained a lot better for it. But the long runs were there. I think I got the long runs in. And man, the first time you run 20 miles, that is just a huge milestone. And you feel like you have this superpower. Like, I can't believe I ran that far. It's just such a great feeling. It's still amazing to run that far to me. I mean, I've done it lots of times now, but 20 miles is a long way to run.
I think we live in a society that we try to, people will circle the block for 10 minutes trying to find the closest parking space or, take the elevator instead of the stairs. And everything about our culture is for convenience and ease. And so when you decide to become a marathoner and put yourself through that training, it's like you're going against all these cultural norms. Like running 20 miles, like who does that to themselves? You have to, you really have that singular focus. And a lot of times, the friends who are not runners who don't understand, it's like, I don't even drive that in my car. You hear all the jokes and everything. So it's, it's really going against our culture of ease and convenience and, challenging yourself in a whole new way.
My brother-in-law will frequently ask me how far I ran, and then he will reply, "That's why they invented cars." So,
I've heard that one too.
I often think of the popularity of distance running exploding in the 70s almost as a backlash to our culture becoming so convenient because, we can almost not leave our houses today. You can get everything delivered to your house. You can order anything online. You can work remotely, and next thing you know, it's like that movie WALL-E where you just never move. You're always sitting down. And so I think it's a great thing that runners are getting into distance running in higher and higher numbers today. I consider the marathon, when I think about it, to be a really challenging event, just because of its sheer distance. You need a lot of physiological tools to really run it well. So it's not something that I love seeing beginners tackle, before they've built up some of the fitness and some of the speed beforehand. But, with that said, I think it can be done as long as we're being careful with the training. And so I want to spend some time talking about being careful, or in other words, avoiding training mistakes. And I know that both of you have coached hundreds, if not thousands, of marathoners over the years. So when you look at all of the marathoners that you've coached over this long period of time, what do you think might be the one or two biggest mistakes that beginners are making when they're trying to tackle the marathon?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is having the wrong motivation. And you might think, well, what could be the wrong motivation? Well, a lot of times people get into it for the wrong reasons. So I hear a lot of people say, well, so-and-so, my friend pressured me into running a marathon, or I'm running a marathon to lose weight, or I'm doing it because it's going to be fun, and not to discount those reasons, but there are going to be times in your training when it's not fun. And if you're not careful, people do gain weight while training for a marathon. And you may end up hating that person who pressured you into it. So, really having the right motivation to start out with is going to help you avoid a lot of mistakes along the way. For one thing, you're going to look at it, like you said, as laying a solid foundation instead of just kind of like let's hurry up and cram for this marathon. We see a lot of people like, oh, I'm going to do my first marathon in 12 weeks. And, they're just starting to train, and it may work out okay. They may survive, hopefully they survive. They're not going to have a good experience, and they're probably going to get injured along the way. So we always tell people, don't cram for a marathon. Take that time to build a solid running base, and incorporate some of those things like strength training, and really learning how to train smart is going to help you to go the distance and have a better time doing it. So those are a couple of things I think when I think of beginners, is having that right motivation, because that motivation is going to help you do the right thing when it's not easy. And then also, not trying to rush the process, and realizing that, you have to do you. You can't be comparing yourself to other people. I see a lot of people who, especially for a first marathon, and they're pretty new to running, they want to set a really aggressive time goal. And that often doesn't turn out very well for them either, because they're either going to skip steps in the process, push themselves too hard. And if it doesn't work out for them, if they don't hit that particular time they were aiming for, it can be a lot of disillusionment and disappointment with the process, and can kind of end up being that one and done, and that wasn't the greatest experience. So, those are some things that come to mind quickly for me.
One of the things I like about having my own podcast is that I can go completely off topic. And so that's what I'm going to do right now. You mentioned something that I want to hit on a little bit. And you said your motivation for running a marathon could be misplaced. And one of those motivations was, I'm running a marathon to lose weight. And you also mentioned that runners very frequently put on weight when they're marathon training. I want to talk about that a little bit, because I do see that a lot too. So many runners want to use marathon training as their weight loss training.
Right.
But it very frequently doesn't work. And in my view, it's not the type of training you want to do if your goal is weight loss. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that is exactly right. And I think, many of us started running. I know personally, when I was in my teens and early 20s, I did run because I thought I needed to lose weight. And so that, obviously you're doing this cardiovascular exercise, and you see it touted in the media as the most efficient way to lose weight. So running, and you think, okay, well, the more running I do, such as in marathon training, the more weight I should lose. And often, people don't realize that the more you run, the more you exercise, the hungrier you get. So then you tend to compensate by eating more, and often you're tired and maybe short on time. So you're not really intentional about the types of foods you're eating. There's a lot of the convenience type foods. Maybe you crave salty or sugary things, and those are not giving you the most nutritional bang for your buck. They're just adding extra weight. And so I see a lot of people, they're like, what is going on? I've started training for this marathon and I've put on 10 or 15 pounds. This is not what I signed up for. And they don't realize that diet has more to do with weight loss than actually exercise does. So
yes.
Yeah, that's a very common misconception.
Abs are made in the kitchen, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. When I think about weight loss, the things that are going to make you actually accomplish your weight loss goals are, strength training, running, but it's the type of running that you're doing that's really important. And if you want to structure a running program that's optimized for weight loss, I think it's good to have a long run in there, but generally speaking, it doesn't have to be 20 miles. You're probably not going to do the same weekly mileage for weight loss. You're going to be doing more intensity, and it's that intensity that is going to really help with your weight loss goals. But I think at the end of the day, 80% of any weight loss effort is going to be much more dependent upon your diet than based on what you're doing out on the road or in the weight room. So that was our little detour on our marathon podcast. I want to get back to some of the mistakes. And Angie, you mentioned rushing your training, basically cramming for a marathon. We can cram for exams. I don't know if cramming for a marathon is the best idea. This is probably the number one mistake that I see. And it's interesting. I got some pushback when I published an article a couple years ago asking, are you really ready to start training for a marathon? And I basically said, if you have 18 to 20 weeks to train for a marathon, you need to be comfortable running 10 miles. If you're not comfortable running 10 miles, you're probably not ready to even start training for a marathon, never mind ready to run one. And so that, I got a little bit of pushback from that. People are like, well, if it's a goal I have, I should be able to work toward it. Of course. But look, I'm a coach. I'm going to tell you the ideal way to do things, the best way to do it, so that you're not only going to be able to accomplish your goals, but you're going to be able to do it safely without a lot of injuries. Have you noticed that runners, in terms of another training error that they frequently make, have you noticed that runners do speed work that is either too demanding or is not periodized appropriately for the marathon?
I tend to find that most beginner runners who are not following a specific plan, it's geared toward their fitness level, often have one speed for running. And they tend to do all their running kind of like in a mid to high zone 3 heart rate. And so they're not really easy running. They're not doing those easy recovery runs. And they're not really doing the fitness specific speed work. They're just kind of running all their runs at the same pace. And they're wondering why they're not improving, or, maybe finding some injury or under recovery issues because, like I said, they're just not hitting their training appropriately. And maybe also they're trying to overdo it with other fitness classes or in the weight room, perhaps. And so I find that a lot of people in the beginning, they're gung-ho with it, and they don't really realize that they need to balance their training like that. And they don't realize they need rest days. They need to listen to their body. And there's other factors that go into getting faster and becoming a stronger runner, like sleep and nutrition and all those things that are, not so sexy, I guess.
We see that a lot, though. It's amazing through the years how many runners have come to us who are just kind of on the edge of burnout. Injuries have started to develop. And we ask them, how many days a week are you running? And they're beginners. And they're like, well, 5 days, 6 days a week sometimes. And at what effort are you doing your runs? And they're pushing hard every run because they feel like they're not making gains unless they go out and do that.
If they're not PRing every run, then something must be wrong. And they reach these plateaus in their training and their fitness and, sometimes tend to slip backwards because they're not, challenging their body appropriately and they're not taking that recovery time.
Yeah, I see that all the time too. And it's funny, when I write training plans for runners, a frequent question I get is, why are you slowing me down so much? And then also at the same time, why are you making me run so fast in these given workouts? So what I'm doing is I'm basically slowing them down for 80% of their running. But, 1 day a week, maybe 2, we're going to be doing some faster running that is a lot faster than what they're currently used to. And, this really kind of hits on the training principle of make your hard days hard and your easy days easy. And you're definitely right. I mean, I see runners who are running all of their runs basically at almost of a tempo or lactate threshold effort. Maybe not quite that fast, but it's more of a steady state or moderate effort. And in Jack Daniels' book, I think it's just Daniels' running formula, he calls this gray zone training. Now, I think any pace can have an appropriate spot in a training plan, depending on how you're doing it and how it's structured. But when you're just doing all of your runs at a moderate effort and you're just kind of pushing a little bit, you're not getting the recovery you need when you're sore or tired, and you're not really giving your body the chance to go through the adaptation process because you're not stressing yourself as much as you need to. It's just a little bit of stress. It's like a lukewarm stress. It's just not sufficient enough. I'll say too, the other The other training mistake that I've seen a lot with many runners is that, they're 14, 15 weeks out from the marathon and they're on the track running 8 times 400 at like their mile race pace. And I'm just thinking to myself, how is that really specific to the marathon? How is that helping you? How is that building the physiological tools that you need to succeed at the marathon? Let's transition a little bit from mistakes to, okay, how do we ensure that we don't make these mistakes? What can we do in our training to really get to the starting line as safely as we can?
Well, I think it comes back to first mindset again. So, what is your goal for your running, for your training? And, I encourage my clients and runners I come in contact with to have the goal of being a strong, healthy runner for life. So it's more about being, just your best at any one race. It's about building a strong, healthy body, a strong, functional body. And so to approach your training from that standpoint, don't be a one and done and, get injured in the process kind of thing. Have that motivation. And so take the time that you need to build that solid running base, to incorporate strength work, to take those rest days, to get the sleep that you need, and to realize that everyone has fears and anxieties about the process. And like you said earlier, I think when we have fear and anxiety, it's kind of like, well, we need to do more because that makes us feel like, okay, we're checking all the boxes and, more is more, right? But often with training and improving and having a solid first marathon, you really need to be doing maybe not less, but you need to be doing it in appropriate ways. And so following a smart training plan that is really works for your level. I see a lot of people who just download a plan off the internet and boom, they're running 6 days a week and all they're doing is running. So, really, really doing the right amount of mileage and days per week for your body. And I think another important thing is that you catch small issues early. So, if you have those niggles or those problems that crop up, don't ignore them and think that you can just run through them and everything's going to be all right. Mm-hmm. In most cases, everything's not going to be all right if you continue to marathon train through an injury. So really take the time to look back, and look back maybe on your running log. Why you're getting this injury? Is it, an issue with your shoes? Is it an issue with the type of surfaces that you're running on continually? Is it because you've been neglecting your strength work? Is it because you're running too many days a week? Look back and kind of try to track any trends that you can see. And then, take that recovery time. It's better to miss a couple of runs to take care of an issue in the beginning than it is to just try to power through and get closer to your race and not even be able to get to the starting line because you've got a full-blown injury on your hands. So I would say, the successful first-time marathoners, they see the problems early and they address them. And that may mean getting to a sports medicine doctor. It may mean going to a physical therapist. It may mean, getting a coach that can just really kind of hold your hand a little bit more and design a plan that's more tailored towards your level.
There's so much in there that I want to dive into. Angie, that was gold. More than worth the price of admission here. Let's talk about how a runner knows whether a plan is appropriate. You kind of use the example of a runner downloads a plan online. Next day, the next week, they're running 6 days a week. How do we know if a plan is going to be appropriate for us? Like, what do we look for?
Well, I think it helps to know yourself as a runner. Think about how long you've been running. What is your running base? So, if you're running 3 days a week and your average mileage is maybe 15 miles a week, then you don't want to jump into a plan that's going to have you running 40 miles a week right out the gate. That's not an appropriate progression. So you really need to start out with less is more. And I often recommend beginners or people who are maybe masters runners who struggle with injury or, overtraining or under recovery type issues to start out with a training plan that has them running every other day. Because I find that a lot of the back-to-back, especially if they're doing too many hard days in a row, they just don't get that recovery time. So it may be good in the beginning just to be running 3 to 4 days a week. And if you look, a lot of the plans and you hear the elite runners, they're running 100 plus miles per week, or, we kind of play that comparison game. We see all these perfect, what looks like perfect people and perfect runners on Instagram or Facebook. And, they've got this.
All their runs look amazing.
All their runs look amazing. They never really show us the dark side of running.
They all live in Boulder, Colorado.
They're running
300 days of sunshine.
Yeah, it looks like they're hitting it hard, running every single day. And it's easy to kind of compare ourselves and think, well, I'm only running 3 days a week. I'm obviously not cut out for this running thing, or I'm a loser. But you just realize that you have to progress. And I made the same mistake. When I was training for my first marathon, I knew nothing. I didn't know any other runners. I didn't know anyone who'd ever run a marathon, actually. And so I just downloaded a plan off the internet. I just ran,
A free plan.
Yeah, free plan. I didn't do any strength work. I didn't do any cross training. And I think I fell into the trap of, pretty much doing the same effort every single run. And so I wasn't.
You were running like 5 days a week, weren't you?
I think so. And, very soon I had IT band issues crop up. I had lower back pain. I just, had all the expected things when you don't know what you're doing and you're not training appropriately. And I was able to finish my first marathon, but then I had like a 6-month process after that of having to rehab my IT band. Sounds like something similar to what you went through. And I realized that I couldn't continue with what I was doing and be able to be a strong, healthy runner for life. And so I had to add in the strength work and the cross training. For me, adding in yoga was very beneficial because it was such a different thing from running, and it created a lot of body awareness. I could figure out where my weak areas were and start to work on those things. And so that kind of led me to more of a less is more approach for beginners. And, a lot of times people will be able to progress up to those more challenging training plans. But if you try to do that right out of the gate, often you'll get injured and it's going to be a very disheartening experience. And that's not what we want for people who are taking on the huge challenge of training for their first marathon.
Right. And for those runners, if it's your first marathon, even if it's not your first, but you might have had trouble with the marathon in the past, I think it's always a really great idea to get some guidance. Maybe that's not, as strong as getting a coach, but someone who's run some marathons, a trusted resource just to guide you in the right direction so that you're not making a lot of these huge mistakes. It's going to save you potentially the marathon itself, but a lot of injury and heartache and frustration along the way. One of the things that you said that I want to just reiterate a little bit was that, the first week or two of a marathon plan, it should be relatively similar, I think, to what you're currently doing as a runner. So, if you're running 3 days a week for 15 miles, like you mentioned, Angie, don't start on a plan that has you running 5 days a week for 40 miles. So that's a general rule that I like to use for marathoners, and not really beginners, but really any marathoner. If you're starting a marathon plan, the first week should be relatively easy. It should not be substantially higher volume or more intensity than what you're currently doing, because the plan will progress from there. It's only going to get more difficult. So don't make it harder than it has to be by starting at a level that you're already, struggling to complete. So I think that's really important. Angie, the other thing that I'm hearing from kind of your description of your first marathon experience and how to avoid some of those mistakes is that running is only one part of your job as a marathoner in training. You've talked about everything from nutrition to sleep to strength training to yoga, cross training. And I think what this speaks to is the fact that we have to think of ourselves as athletes that specialize in running, not as just runners. So you need to work on functional flexibility and strength and coordination, general athleticism, all the things that other athletes who might be engaged in team sports are doing all the time. And, they might not directly use those skills in a game of basketball, for example, just like we might not be doing a deadlift in mile 12 of a marathon. But that doesn't mean that it's not going to make us better runners. And if we're not good athletes, we're never going to be good runners.
I think that's a great point. And I think that comes back to mindset in a way, is because I know when I came into long distance running, I did not think of myself as an athlete. I had never played team sports growing up. I had no hand-eye coordination. So I didn't feel like an athlete. I didn't feel like a runner. And so starting the process of seeing myself as an athlete and as a runner was really formative in taking care of my body appropriately and training appropriately. Because like you said, if you see yourself as an athlete, then you need to be doing those things to make you a successful athlete. And I think a lot of times when people are first starting out as runners, maybe, training for their first 5K or half marathon or marathon, they have a lot of anxiety and fear that they're not a real runner. And I know I felt that. I didn't feel like I had earned my real runner status or something. And I remember showing up to my first 5K and people are going to be able to tell that I'm not a real runner. They're going to be like, fraud, And then I looked around and I saw ordinary people and I was like, wow, maybe I do fit into this community. Obviously, there were the very fit, athletic people who looked super intimidating. But it was the same thing in my first marathon. I didn't feel like I really belonged there, even though I'd put in the training. I felt like I was just kind of, fake it till you make it kind of thing. And I looked around and I saw these thousands of people who all had different stories and different backgrounds, but they were united by the fact that they had worked really hard to get there. And so I think, the sooner a person can embrace their identity as an athlete and as a runner, the better they're going to be in taking care of themselves and having that strong, healthy body and making the gains that they want to in their training. Because it all goes together. We have a lot of fears, a lot of anxieties. And I would say even, not that I've ever been or will be an elite runner, I would say elite runners have to deal with the same kind of fears. And I think we often have this mentality that those people who we admire in running, they're like a different breed than the rest of us. They don't deal with these fears and anxieties. But I think the difference is that a person who's successful in running or whatever area they have the goal in is that they systematically move toward their fear and they face that fear. And it's the process of working hard and not backing down from your goal and going about it in a smart way that you become a stronger and more resilient person. And, that's kind of what courage is. It's not backing down in the face of that anxiety and fear and realizing that if you have that goal, you can make a way to make it happen. And you can do it in a smart and systematic manner.
So sign up for a race that scares you a little, right? Like that first marathon.
And then be serious about training for it.
We had a psychologist on the show a couple years ago named Jeff Brown. He wrote the book, The Runner's Brain. And he's got a chapter called I Think, Therefore I Am a Runner, kind of playing off the French philosopher René Descartes, I think, therefore I am. And he says a lot of people don't see themselves as a runner because they don't have the typical, maybe, quote unquote, typical runner body type, or they're not fast. Maybe they're back of the pack marathoners. And so they don't want to embody that identity or embrace that identity as a runner. He said, you start calling yourself a runner and thinking like one, then you become one, instead of the other way around. We don't have to run a certain, number of races before we're coronated as a runner, right?
There's no ceremony that takes place.
He says, put things in your everyday life that remind you of your chosen identity as a runner. Put your running shoes in a prominent place. Hang up your medals. Have Runner's World magazine laying out. Just little things like that in your environment to cue you to go on a run and to remind you of your identity. And if you identify as a runner, then you're more likely to go out on a run, because then you're just being congruent with your chosen identity.
Yeah, there you go. It's just you're being true to yourself. And
yeah.
I definitely agree. I think behavior follows intention or mindset.
Yeah.
And so if you can change your mindset, then your behavior will soon follow. Let's talk a little bit more about the intention for your marathon. And Angie, this is something that you were talking about before. Let's separate runners who just want to finish with runners who might have a performance or a time goal in the marathon. What's the major difference in training between these two distinct type of runners?
Well, I tend to advise first-time marathoners, especially if they do not have a history in, shorter distances, if they haven't don't have a long history in running, to look at that first marathon as primarily going the distance. So not to set challenging time goals for themselves, because I see a lot of people who tend to hurt themselves in training, and then just the whole experience is disillusioning because, they didn't hit that 4-hour marathon or, whatever time goal they've set for themselves. And so, for a person who wants to finish a marathon, you really still need a lot of the same mentality, like we talked about, seeing yourself as a runner. And so doing those things to make you a successful runner, but also to, not cut corners. And then just basically train for endurance rather than speed. So, the bulk of your running is going to be at an easier, a slower pace. You probably won't be doing a lot of speed work sessions as a beginning marathoner, especially if you've never, gotten up to the point where you've done a 16-mile long run or an 18-miler or a 20-miler. Some of the other key pieces like strength training and nutrition and sleep are going to be the same, whether you're an experienced marathoner or whether you're a new marathoner. You really need to dial those in for your body. And I will say that everyone is unique. Everyone's an experiment of one. So we see people coming to the marathon with a lot of different fitness backgrounds and different confidence levels too. If you were an athlete previously who saw success in their sport, they're going to have a whole different set of tools as someone who has never, ever run a race before and is just beginning the whole process of wanting to become a marathoner. But I will say, it's all about just gradually increasing that distance in your long run, not trying to cram too much in. And then, appropriately tapering before the race. That's another mistake I see people make. Sometimes they just try to do their own training plan. And, they think that every week has to be more miles and a longer distance long run. And, they're like, okay, well, my marathon's next weekend and I just ran 24 miles this weekend. What should I do in the coming week? And I'm like, wow, you should have been tapering. Yeah. There's nothing that you can do in the week before a marathon to improve your fitness, but the opposite is true. You can actually do a lot of things that are going to harm your race performance. Mm-hmm. So, having the proper guidance and support from, with a good training plan or a good running community who's going to support you in your own individual journey, or having a good coach is going to be key. So
we tell people for your first marathon, just have the goal of finishing strong and injury-free and cross that finish line with a smile on your face.
Yeah, be proud of yourself, whether, you got that secret time goal or whether it was slower than you wanted, because you're still a marathoner. You cross that finish line, whether you ran, a sub 3 hour or a 6 hour and 30-minute marathon, you are still a marathoner. You still get the same medal. So, you still need to be proud of yourself for the work that you put in.
As soon as someone does their first marathon, they're always thinking, can I get faster at my next one?
Yes.
So we do field a lot of questions, or Angie does, about running a BQ, setting a PR, getting faster. So we do talk about that a lot.
Yeah. And that's the thing, if you have a slow first marathon, it just sets you up for a better PR the next time,
That's right. The strategy.
It's like the golden lining to the cloud, perhaps, if you have a slow first marathon.
That's why my last marathon was so slow. I'm planning a big comeback.
Well, I think it's a really powerful way to set yourself up for success in the future. Not necessarily sandbagging, your first marathon so that, the second one is almost by definition faster, but putting yourself in a position to have a good experience. Let's stay healthy. Don't get injured. Finish strong. Let's avoid the scenario where you're sitting on the curb at mile 24, just crying and calling your mom. Let's try to avoid that at all costs and just have a good experience. And I think that is not just based on your time goal. Maybe it's just a finish, or maybe it's a very conservative goal, but also with the training before the marathon. So give yourself enough time, build up your fitness gradually, progressively, and in a very safe way. And you are going to get, the title of marathoner. You're going to feel good about your training. You're going to feel good about your race. Your body is not going to hate you. And that's going to set you up to have a great performance later on in the future, whether that's a marathon or any other other race. I think it's just going to keep you engaged with your training and just much more likely to tackle the next one, with vigor.
Exactly. And I think, there are a lot of different goals for people running marathons. Back in the 70s, kind of the big running boom, you only saw fast people running marathons for the most part. And so it's become way more of a social event. And, so I think, as we look at people and their goals for running the marathon, everyone should have the goal of having a strong and healthy race and a strong and healthy training cycle. And then, whether you're training for a PR or, to qualify for the Olympic trials, or you're simply trying to run a marathon in all 50 states, or you're doing it with friends or for a charity, there's so many good reasons to do races and marathons. But, there's so many key factors of having a successful experience, no matter what your goal is. So keeping that in mind is really important.
Oh, it's so rich. Such an amazing and transformative experience to put yourself through that process, especially if you are like a desk potato like I was, and build up to your first marathon. It is we believe, a life-changing journey. And in the beginning, we talked about a lot of folks have gotten into running because they wanted to lose weight. And I can appreciate that, getting a person into running. But then you can go beyond that, and you can discover that long distance running is this whole lifestyle that you can do over a lifetime, really, because we've been talking to people on our podcast in the past who've been running marathons for 30 or 40 years. We were able to even interview Ed Whitlock of Canada before he passed away, who was set the many world records for a masters runner or a runner in his 80s, right? Mm-hmm. But we've discovered it's just an awesome way to see the world and travel. Angie's done 52 marathons. We've traveled a lot of amazing places. We've met some fantastic people, and also challenged family members, not directly, but just by dint of our example. We've seen other people get into running and get healthier. So just spreading inspiration and just a lot of side benefits that you wouldn't think of once you start running marathons.
It reminds me of the saying, you don't stop running because you get old. You get old because you stop running. And
yeah, I like
really
that.
love that quote. And, I also just remind me, of all the things in my life that have happened because of running. I met my wife on the cross country team in college. And so
wow.
Now my job is as a running coach, and my life would be extraordinarily different if I didn't make that seemingly minor decision way back in 1998 to stay on that cross-country team in high school. And so if that can give anybody listening here a little shred of inspiration to stick with their training, to get through those early morning, dark, cold, or hot and humid runs when they don't really want to, you never know what running might give you in the future. And I think that is not only exciting, but I think it's just something that, I think hopefully anybody can experience.
Yeah, that's an awesome point. And you never know who you're going to inspire along the way, too. Because, I don't believe in preaching and being confrontational about, or being evangelistic about necessarily marathons. We think they're a great thing and life-changing, but we don't pressure people to run marathons or anything. But, just by your example of trying to live a healthy lifestyle, of being fit, of all the opportunities of, as a runner, long distance runner, it's no big deal. Like someone wants to go on a hike. Yeah, let's go hiking. You have that baseline fitness to take on challenges and live life to the fullest. So that's one thing that's really exciting.
It makes a lot of things seem a lot easier.
That's for sure.
Definitely.
Unfortunately, that's also like when a family member wants you to move all their boxes. They're like, look, I know you run marathons. You can help me for a few hours.
Yeah,
exactly. Like, I've got a race coming up. I can't hurt myself.
Yeah, there you go. I have a long run the next day. Sorry. All right, guys, this is a good place to stop. Thanks so much for coming on and talking about the marathon. I love the marathon. It's such an interesting event, and you guys really lent such a helpful perspective to it. So I hope our beginner runners, our marathon hopefuls, and maybe even our veterans got some helpful information out of this podcast. And before we go, where can folks find out more about you guys and your work and what you're doing to help runners?
Yeah. Well, it's been a great honor to be on your show, Jason. I appreciate letting us talk to you. We live over at marathontrainingacademy.com, and our podcast is called Marathon Training Academy, and you can find us in iTunes or wherever podcasts are found. And we're just talking about all things marathons. Been doing the show for about 8 years and still going strong.
That's awesome. I love it. All right. Well, I hope folks check out marathontrainingacademy.com and your podcast. If I'm not mistaken, I might be coming up on your podcast soon. So that's very exciting.
Yeah, definitely.
And until then, thanks again for coming on. Okay, everyone. That was my conversation with Angie and Trevor from Marathon Training Academy. I'll have more information about them, their site and podcast, and notes from this episode at Strength Running. So don't miss out on the blog post for this episode on strengthrunning.com. And before you pause me for today, one more quick suggestion. If you have a marathon question or issue or problem, then I'm here for you. Shoot me an email and let's chat. I'm more accessible than you might think, and my goal is to help you achieve your goals. So don't be a stranger. Thanks for listening, and I hope you have a great week of running. Until next time.